He laughed in my face and said, "You, the poor waitress? Get out of my way." What happened after that changed everything. Every second mattered, so do not skip ahead. If you love stories where arrogance gets taken down, like this video and subscribe for more. My name is Emily. I was 28 and I worked nights at Olivewood, the kind of restaurant where the chandeliers looked more like jewelry than light. I lived 2 blocks away with my mother Rosa in a tiny apartment that smelled of laundry soap and the lemon oil I used to keep my pockets free of food stains. I was not supposed to be there that night as a server. I was supposed to be learning the business from the inside while keeping my hands in the real work. I needed the job to pay rent and to cover my mother's medical bills. I needed it to keep a promise to my father who owned the place but had stepped away after a stroke. I kept that part secret because I wanted to earn respect, not sympathy. On a Tuesday in late spring, Marcus Hale arrived with an entourage and everything shifted. Olivewood was a contrast of warm wood and cold silver, the linen smelling faintly of starch, the kitchen sending waves of butter and roasting garlic that hit my throat like a welcome. Daniel, our manager, had a uniform that smelled like starch and aftershave, his watch glinting under the pendant lights. Anna, the hostess, clicked her heels on the marble and whispered seating instructions. Luis, the chef, banged pans so often that the whole floor vibrated. Jenna, my teammate, kept folding napkins the way her grandmother taught her, fingers rough but precise. Mark, the busser, moved like a shadow, carrying plates that chimed against the rim. I could feel the polished brass of the tray under my palm as I walked, taste the salt on my lip from the tasting spoon I had stuck in my mouth earlier, hear the low murmur of people who thought they belonged. My heart thudded against my ribs because my rent notice was still folded in my pocket, and my mother had called me twice that afternoon to say the landlord had been patient for too long. Rosa had a cough that made her voice thin and musical, and she came down that night because she liked to watch the cooks at work and because the owner liked when she smiled. She sat by the far window in a cardigan that smelled of lavender and tea. I had told her to stay home, but she had insisted. When Marcus Hale entered the room, the air changed. He wore a suit that looked like it paid taxes on its own, his cufflinks catching the light like 2 tiny mirrors. He had a laugh that cut through conversations and a voice that seemed built to dominate. He came with 3 men who held their drinks, like trophies, and a woman who wore sunglasses indoors, though the sky outside was dim. Camera phones appeared as he signed his name in the reservation book. People turned, forks paused mid-air, the silverware hummed. I felt the heat of the kitchen slide under my skin. Daniel gave me a look, the one that said, "Be careful, start easy." I took a breath that tasted like lemon oil and carried the tray to their table. I could feel the linen brush my wrist, smell the citrus in the water glass left on the side table, hear the faint clack of heels from the hostess station. Marcus did not look at me when I spoke. He said, "Where is the wine I ordered?" and his voice had an edge. I smiled and told him it had been delayed, and I would bring it right away. As I turned, he called out, in a voice meant for the room, "You the poor waitress or the owner kid? Which one are you?" The laughter came like a ripple. I felt my cheeks burn, my hands cool and damp with sweat. Someone at a nearby table snickered. The chandeliers seemed to grow louder, their lights sharper, like eyes. That was the moment a phone slid out of a pocket. Sam, the regular, had his face lit by blue light from his screen and was already filming. I froze. If you feel angry or hurt hearing that, you are not alone. Did you ever see someone treated like that in public? Tell me in the comments in one sentence, starting with, "I would stand up," and then say what you would do. Your stories matter and will help others who have been humiliated. Sharing your voice helps this channel decide future videos and supports people who have been treated like dirt. Now back to what happened next. Daniel was midway between asking Marcus to lower his voice and telling me to step aside. I could smell the lemon from the table spritzer and the garlic from a nearby appetizer, the heat of the kitchen like an animal behind the wall. Marcus leaned back and smiled at his friends and said loud enough for everyone, "She must be one of those trust fund kids who wants to play poor, right?" Jenna laughed, but not kindly. I felt a hand on my elbow. It was Luis whispering, "You got this." But my throat was tight and my pulse felt like drums. I remembered my father telling me once that dignity was a kind of currency, and that if I spent it all on strangers, I might go bankrupt. I had to choose. The exchange at the table became a small theater. Marcus poked fun, and the table followed like trained birds. He said, "You should get a better job or go back to Daddy." His words were polished and meant to chip away. I answered simply, "I am not pretending to be anything." He scoffed and said, "No one here cares about your feelings." Anna hovered like a shadow and then stepped forward and said, "Sir, we do ask our guests to respect staff." Marcus waved her off and said, "Who asked you to speak, little Miss Concierge?" Daniel stepped between us and said, "Sir, if there is an issue, we can resolve it privately." Marcus smiled and said, "This is entertainment. I will be the judge of that." A woman at the bar clinked her glass to get attention. Claire, a local reporter I knew by sight, and said quietly, "Are you recording this?" She held up her phone. Sam kept filming. That was when my mother rose, her cardigan whispering against the chair, and said in a voice that trembled but cut clear, "Emily works hard." Marcus looked at her and laughed harder. He called her a charity case and said, "Do not speak out of turn." The plates around us felt colder, the silver heavier. I could see the room turn into a jury. I could feel the tablecloth under my palms, rough like the inside of an old book. The smell of lemon and butter was replaced by a metallic tang that came from fear. I tasted the copper of my own worry, and it made my tongue thick. I saw Jenna clench her jaw, saw Luis wipe his hands on his apron and step closer. I decided to speak. I said, "Marcus, you can mock me all you want, but my mother pays a fair price for her meals, and I have earned every hour I work." He laughed and said, "Earned what? Hand me my wine then, maybe I will be impressed." I replied, "You will not humiliate the woman who raised me in my own place." He cut me off and said, "Watch your tone." I stepped forward and my voice was clearer than I expected. I told him, "My father started this restaurant. He had a stroke and I have been keeping the doors open while he recovers. I work every shift because I choose to keep this family business alive." Marcus studied me as if testing a gemstone. Then he sneered, "You mean your father owns this place and you have been pretending to be poor?" This was when the room inhaled and some people leaned forward. Daniel said, "If you have an issue with service, we will refund you." But Marcus said, "No refunds. I will make an example." The back and forth had become a fuse. The dialogue escalated. Marcus said, "Do you understand who I am? I could buy the building." I said, "Maybe you could, but that does not give you the right to humiliate people." Marcus scoffed and said, "As the owner, daughter, do you expect special treatment?" I said, "I expect respect for everyone who works here." He shot back, "Who asked you to act like you are morally superior?" Anna stepped in and said, "Please leave if you cannot comply with our house rules." Marcus barked, "That is the funniest thing I have heard all week." Sam kept filming and muttered, "This is gold." Claire whispered into her recorder that she had never seen anything like it. Mark the busser looked like he might cry, and Luis set a plate down with a tremor in his hand. That was 9 people in the orbit of the table, 8 named and acting, witnesses and colleagues lending presence. At the height of the confrontation, Marcus rose and pointed at me. He said, "You, the poor waitress, ruined my evening, and I will make sure everyone knows you are nothing." He leaned in close to my mother and said, "You too are a sad sight." The room went very quiet, except for the small hum of the extractor fan above the kitchen. I felt my mother shrink into herself, and I felt something like ice run through my veins. I looked at Marcus and I told him, "No." The word cut through the room. It was short and final. I explained out loud that I had been hiding my last name because there were people who would disrespect me if they knew who I was, and because my father wanted me to learn every job from the ground up. He laughed and said, "A stunt for sympathy, then?" I answered, "I wanted to earn it, and you earned nothing but contempt tonight." Someone in the room had already uploaded Sam's video. Within an hour, my phone buzzed like an insect hive. The first wave of notifications were from Claire, who tagged a local news feed. Then Maya, an influencer, reposted with the caption, "This is what entitlement looks like," and the first 1,000 views rolled in. The footage captured Marcus dismissing my mother, his laugh, my reply, and then my reveal. The video had the smell of the place, the clink of cutlery, the low register of Daniel trying to keep order. In 12 hours, the clip had 300,000 views, and the comments were raw. People said the word humiliate over and over. Local groups shared it with outrage. The restaurant's reservation line flooded, not with cancellations, but with people asking for my table. A thread on the community forum started by Claire had screenshots and timestamps. Councilwoman Rivera posted a statement asking for public accountability and asking businesses to treat workers with dignity. A neighborhood blogger wrote that Marcus reflected a culture of dismissing people who are not in his economic circle. By the next morning, Marcus's company had issued a bland apology and then pulled it under pressure. Investors began to ask questions. Public relations partners dropped him. An online petition calling for his removal from the advisory council gathered tens of thousands of signatures. The repercussion was immediate and real. Within 24 hours, Marcus was facing calls from a board member who said, "This is bad for the brand," and from a sponsor who was nervous about association. Claire interviewed me for a piece that hit the local morning show, and donations began to arrive in small amounts in our PayPal inbox labeled "For Emily and Rosa." People sent food and flowers and offers. A nonprofit for hospitality workers reached out and offered legal resources. Olivewood's reservations were fuller than before, and strangers told me they would keep coming because of how my mother smiled that night, because dignity mattered. I was offered a column for a local news site and an invitation to speak at a hospitality conference. Marcus's reputation bled away as more people reposted the clip and pointed out past behaviors of his that resembled entitlement more than leadership. The company he chaired lost a lucrative contract that same week, and they announced an internal review. The short video had become evidence, a public record of his conduct. 1 month later, I had a short segment on a morning show where I talked about why I had kept my identity secret and how this was about respect, not about money. 3 months in, I was meeting with community leaders and a small group of investors who wanted to support programs that trained hospitality workers for management. 6 months later, Olivewood had a small scholarship fund in my father's name for staff education. My father came back to the office for short visits and clapped jokingly when I walked by like he was proud of something I could not see. Marcus resigned from the advisory council and issued a longer apology that read like it had been edited by lawyers. He did not return to Olivewood. The aftermath changed us. Rosa's cough lessened with better care, paid for by strangers turned supporters, and by a fund set up by guests who wanted to help. Jenna was promoted to assistant manager, and Louise finally took a 3-week break. Daniel stayed on and told me he had never been prouder to be part of a team. Claire kept writing follow-ups, and Sam got a small shout-out from the local paper for catching the footage. The solidarity we felt was like warmth on a cold night. The video had exposed a pattern, and it had also connected people. I learned that the room had many small engines of kindness, and that the public has the power to call out harm when there is proof. If you are still here, know this: the cost was real. There were lawyers and angry emails and a book of messages that made me cry at night. I lost some privacy and gained a platform that felt heavy sometimes, but I also gained clarity. Staying silent would have cost my dignity more than any landlord notice. Speaking up cost me fear and sleeplessness, and then gave me unexpected work to do. Today, Olivewook is fuller, and our menu has 2 new dishes named after my mother. The scholarship fund helps people who cannot afford training. The viral clip sits online as proof that a single moment can prompt accountability. He tried to humiliate the poor waitress, and instead he was exposed. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that dignity matters, and subscribe for more stories of people standing up and making change.